The tribe expelled 2 Apache women for being widowed. The cowboy said, "Come with me." Wild West. Naomi and Liana stirred from their small, simple homes, the air thick with the scent of smoke from the early fires and the faint aroma of baked corn. But the peaceful morning felt hollow to them. Their husbands, men they had loved and shared their lives with, had been taken away in a sudden raid by a rival tribe just a few days ago. The sisters had barely had time to mourn before life demanded more from them than they thought they could bear. Naomi clenched her fists, feeling the ache in her chest that refused to fade. Liana's eyes were red and swollen from sleepless nights, yet her body moved with the quiet determination of someone who had no choice but to survive. The village itself seemed different now, strange and distant, as if the place they had always called home was watching them with cold indifference. The elders gathered in the center of the village, their faces lined with age and authority, whispering among themselves. Naomi and Liana could sense their judgment even before words reached their ears. There was no anger, no harsh words, only the unyielding weight of tradition. The Apache way had rules for everything, rules for birth, for marriage, for death. And in their way, the death of a husband marked a woman as no longer belonging. Naomi felt a shiver run down her spine as an elder spoke in a calm, firm voice. "Widows cannot stay in the village. It is the custom." The words fell on them like stones. Naomi felt her knees weaken, and Liana gripped her sister's arm, holding on tightly as if letting go would mean disappearing entirely. They had lost their husbands, the men who had shared their dreams, their fears, and their laughter, and now the only place that had ever felt like home was turning them away. The sisters tried to speak, to plead, but the elders' decision was final. Tradition was unyielding, and no one could challenge it, not even the bravest or most beloved. Naomi's throat burned as she swallowed hard, trying to hold back the sobs that threatened to escape. Liana, though younger and often more spirited, could only nod in silent agreement, her eyes fixed on the dusty ground. As the village prepared for the exile, neighbors and friends passed by, some offering whispered condolences, others avoiding their gaze entirely. There was shame, Naomi realized, not in the sisters themselves, but in the way the village had trained its people to see widows, as shadows of their former selves, as reminders of loss and misfortune. Naomi's heart ached at the thought. They had loved, had been loyal and kind, and now they were being treated as if they had failed simply because life had taken something precious from them. The sun climbed higher, and the shadows of the adobe huts grew short. It was time to leave, whether they were ready or not. Naomi and Liana stepped outside their homes, each carrying only a small bundle of belongings. The sisters walked slowly, taking in the familiar sights of their village with heavy hearts. Children played nearby, their laughter sounding almost cruel in the quiet of Naomi's mind. The river glistened in the distance, a place they had often visited with their husbands to fish and talk. The hills and plains stretched endlessly beyond the village, beautiful yet unforgiving. Naomi felt a pang of fear. This land they had known since childhood suddenly seemed enormous, empty, and dangerous. But there was no turning back. The elders' decision was clear, and their home would no longer offer protection or comfort. The path ahead was uncertain. Naomi tried to steady her breathing, taking each step carefully. Liana stayed close, whispering words of comfort in her sister's ear. "We have each other," she said softly. "That's what matters." Naomi nodded, clinging to her sister's words like a lifeline. They had nothing else. No shelter, no food prepared for the journey, no allies in the wide world beyond the village. The sun grew hotter and the wind picked up, carrying the dry scent of dust and sage across the trail. Naomi felt the sting of sand against her skin, and Liana's hair whipped across her face. The sisters pressed on, driven by a combination of necessity and the faint glimmer of hope that they might survive. As the hours passed, the landscape changed. The gentle slopes of the village gave way to rocky terrain and scattered cacti. Naomi's feet were sore, and her muscles ached with fatigue, yet she did not let herself stop. Each step was a struggle, but she reminded herself that stopping would mean despair, and despair could not help them survive. Liana, though younger, showed remarkable resilience. She scouted the path ahead, pointing out water sources they could reach, and helping Naomi navigate the tricky rocky areas. The sisters relied on each other completely, their bond becoming their greatest strength. In that moment, Naomi realized that even though the village had rejected them, they still had each other, and that was enough to keep moving forward. By late afternoon, the sisters found a small stream, its water clear and cool. They knelt by the edge, cupping their hands to drink, the refreshing liquid soothing their parched throats. Naomi felt a small spark of relief, a reminder that the world beyond the village was not entirely cruel. They rested for a while, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft gurgle of water, allowing themselves a brief reprieve. Yet even in this quiet moment, Naomi could not escape the reality of their situation. They were alone, wandering in a land filled with dangers they could barely imagine. Each shadow could hide a predator, each bend in the trail could hide someone with ill intentions. As the sun began to sink behind the distant hills, Naomi and Liana set up a simple camp for the night. They gathered dry twigs for a fire, careful to avoid leaving smoke trails that could attract unwanted attention. Naomi's hands trembled as she struck the flint, but soon a small flame danced, casting warm light across their tired faces. They cooked a small meal from foraged roots and dried meat, eating slowly while keeping watch over their surroundings. The fire offered a small measure of comfort, a barrier against the darkness both outside and within themselves. They spoke little, for words seemed inadequate, but the silence was not empty. In that quiet companionship, they found reassurance that they were not entirely lost. As night fell, the desert revealed its full beauty. Stars stretched across the sky like a vast, twinkling canvas, and the sisters gazed upward in wonder and fear. Naomi thought of their husbands, of the lives they had shared, and of the village they had left behind. Tears fell silently down her cheeks, yet she did not wipe them away. Grief, she realized, was not something to be hidden but something to carry with her as she moved forward. Liana rested her head on Naomi's shoulder, sharing the weight of sorrow, and for the first time since the raid, Naomi felt a flicker of courage. The first night in the wilderness was the hardest. The cold pierced through their blankets, and strange sounds echoed in the darkness. But they survived. By dawn, Naomi and Liana had learned something crucial. The world beyond the village was harsh, but it was also full of opportunities. They had faced rejection, grief, and fear, and they had endured. Naomi tightened the straps on her small bundle, and Liana followed suit. They rose with the sun, ready to face the unknown. The sisters no longer saw themselves solely as widows cast out of their home. They were travelers, survivors, and sisters bound by love and resilience. Little did they know, their journey was about to take an unexpected turn. The vast, unpredictable world of the Wild West awaited them, with dangers and chances that could change their lives forever. And it was on the next dusty trail that a lone cowboy, weathered by years on the frontier, would appear, a figure who would offer hope where there had been none, and a chance at a new beginning they had never imagined possible. Naomi and Liana left the familiar edges of their village behind, stepping onto a path that seemed endless under the bright sun. The first steps into the unknown were the hardest. Every sound, every rustle of wind through the dry grass reminded them that they were alone. The sisters walked side by side, their feet kicking up clouds of dust that lingered in the hot air. Naomi's eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the vast stretches of plains and rocky outcrops that stretched as far as the eye could see. Liana walked silently beside her, occasionally glancing back at the fading outlines of the village, a place that had been their home but now felt like a dream that no longer belonged to them. Their journey began slowly. The sun climbed higher, beating down relentlessly, and the sisters felt the harsh heat on their skin. Naomi could feel the sweat trickling down her neck and back, and her shoulders ached from carrying the small bundle of belongings they had managed to bring. Liana's face was streaked with dirt and sweat, yet she walked with determination, refusing to give in to exhaustion. They had no map, no compass, only a rough sense of direction and a deep trust in each other. Every step forward was a small victory against the fear that threatened to overwhelm them. The first day was a test of endurance. The sisters scavenged what they could to sustain themselves. Naomi found small berries growing near a dry creek bed, while Liana caught sight of a rabbit darting through the brush. Together, they fashioned a simple trap from sticks and rope, hoping to catch enough to eat before nightfall. The food they gathered was meager, barely enough to fill their empty stomachs, but it gave them hope. Naomi reminded herself that survival was not about comfort, but about persistence. Liana nodded silently, understanding that the world beyond the village demanded strength and patience, qualities they would need in abundance. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape became more challenging. Rocky hills and scattered cacti replaced the gentle plains near the village. Naomi stumbled more than once, her tired feet slipping on loose stones. Liana extended a hand each time, pulling her sister back to solid ground. The desert was beautiful in its own harsh way. Golden light bathed the hills, and the shadows of rocks stretched long across the ground. Yet, Naomi felt a growing sense of unease. The world beyond the village was wide and empty, a place where danger could appear at any moment. They had heard stories of bandits and wandering predators, of travelers who vanished without a trace. The thought made her heart pound, but she forced herself to keep moving. Fear could not stop them. By late afternoon, they reached a small patch of shade beneath a lone mesquite tree. Exhausted, they collapsed beneath its branches, grateful for even a moment of relief from the sun. Naomi's hands shook as she took a small sip from the water they had carried, and Liana leaned against her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The sisters rested in silence, listening to the quiet hum of the desert. For a moment, they allowed themselves to feel the weight of their grief, to remember the husbands they had lost. Tears came easily, and they did not try to hide them. Naomi realized that mourning was not weakness. It was part of survival, a way to honor those who had gone before. Liana wiped her own tears on the sleeve of her dress and squeezed Naomi's hand, a simple gesture of solidarity. As evening approached, the sisters made a small fire with dry twigs and branches they had gathered. The flames flickered, casting warm light across their tired faces. They cooked a few roots and a small portion of dried meat, sharing the food in silence. The taste was plain, but it was sustenance, and for Naomi and Liana, sustenance was victory. Around the fire, the sisters spoke softly, sharing memories of their husbands and stories of the village that now felt like another lifetime. Liana told Naomi about a time they had danced at a village celebration, laughing so hard that tears streamed down their faces. Naomi smiled through her sadness, grateful for the brief comfort that memory brought. Night fell, and with it came the chilling cold of the desert. Naomi shivered as she wrapped a thin blanket around herself, pulling Liana close for warmth. The wind whistled through the rocks, carrying strange sounds that made the sisters jump at every noise. But they were together, and together they found courage. They whispered plans for the days ahead, talking about finding water, shelter, and food. Each plan was tentative, filled with hope but grounded in reality. Naomi understood that survival meant careful thought, observation, and the courage to face each day, no matter how uncertain. The stars above were brilliant, scattered across the sky like countless tiny lanterns. Naomi and Liana gazed upward, feeling both awe and loneliness. The universe seemed endless, and for a moment Naomi felt small and powerless. Yet, alongside that feeling was a growing sense of determination. They had survived the first day, faced hunger, heat, and fear, and they had not given up. Liana leaned her head on Naomi's shoulder, and Naomi felt a spark of hope. They might be alone, but they were not defeated. Each other's presence was a source of strength, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, humans could endure and adapt. The following days brought new challenges. Naomi and Liana navigated rocky terrain, crossed dry riverbeds, and forded shallow streams. They learned to read the land, following signs of wildlife and tracks in the dust. Naomi discovered a talent for spotting edible plants, while Liana became skilled at creating traps and finding shelter. Together, they learned that survival required patience, observation, and ingenuity. They faced moments of doubt and fear, but each challenge they overcame strengthened their bond and built their confidence. One afternoon, they encountered a rattlesnake coiled near a cactus. Naomi froze, unsure what to do, but Liana remained calm. She instructed Naomi to step back slowly while she carefully guided the snake away. The sisters learned that fear could be managed with knowledge and composure. Small victories like these, though seemingly minor, became symbols of their growing independence and resilience. Naomi realized that while the world beyond the village was harsh, it also offered opportunities to grow, to become stronger than they had ever been. Food remained a constant concern. The sisters hunted small animals, gathered roots, and drank sparingly from streams. Each day required careful rationing and ingenuity. Naomi became more resourceful, fashioning simple tools from rocks and sticks. Liana showed remarkable courage, often venturing slightly ahead to scout the terrain. They learned the rhythms of the desert, the quiet early mornings, the blazing afternoons, and the cold, dark nights. With each passing day, Naomi and Liana became more attuned to the land, understanding that survival was not only about physical endurance, but also about observation and adaptation. Despite the hardships, the sisters found moments of beauty and wonder. They watched sunsets paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, listened to the haunting calls of distant coyotes, and marveled at the constellations above. These moments reminded them that life, even when difficult, could hold joy and inspiration. Naomi often held Liana's hand as they watched the sun dip below the horizon, feeling a sense of connection to the world and to each other that went beyond fear or grief. By the end of the second week, Naomi and Liana had grown stronger, their steps surer, their minds sharper. They had learned to survive, not just endure. Each day was a test, but each day was also proof of their resilience. The sisters were no longer simply widows cast out from their village. They were travelers, explorers of the vast, unpredictable land around them. They relied on each other, drawing strength from shared experience, and in that reliance they found hope. As they prepared to rest on the second night, Naomi whispered to Liana, "We can do this. Together we can survive anything." Liana smiled, a small, tired but genuine smile, and nodded. They settled under the stars once more, holding each other close against the chill, ready to face whatever the desert would bring next. Little did they know, their journey would soon take an unexpected turn. A figure, rugged and solitary, was approaching along the dusty trail, a cowboy who would offer them hope, guidance, and a chance at a future they had not dared to imagine. Naomi and Liana had been traveling through the vast, open plains for days, the horizon stretching endlessly. Before them, the desert, though harsh, had become familiar in its challenges. They had learned to read the subtle signs of nature, the tracks of animals in the dirt, the faint trails of water hidden beneath dry riverbeds, and the patterns of clouds that hinted at approaching weather. Yet even with this knowledge, each day carried a new sense of uncertainty. They had grown stronger and more confident, but they were still alone in a world that could be both beautiful and unforgiving. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the rolling plains, Naomi noticed movement in the distance. At first, it seemed like a trick of the heat, shimmering waves dancing along the horizon. But then a lone figure emerged, riding a horse with steady, measured steps. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in the practical clothing of a frontier traveler, a wide-brimmed hat shielding his face from the sun, worn leather boots, and a sturdy coat that had clearly seen many seasons. The sisters froze, unsure whether to feel hope or fear. They had heard stories of men traveling alone in the Wild West, some kind and helpful, others dangerous and cruel. The cowboy stopped a short distance from them, raising a hand in a gesture that was both cautious and friendly. Naomi instinctively stepped closer to Liana, whispering, "We should be careful, we don't know who he is." Liana nodded, her eyes wide but curious. The man dismounted slowly, his movements calm and deliberate. He carried no weapon in an aggressive stance, only a simple satchel slung across his shoulder. His eyes were kind, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he surveyed the land and the two sisters before him. "Hello there," he said, his voice low and steady. "Are you two all right?" Naomi's voice trembled slightly as she replied, We are fine." She wasn't sure if it was the desert heat or the nervousness that made her words come out hesitantly. Liana, however, spoke up with a quiet firmness, "We are traveling. We have been walking for many days." The cowboy nodded, understanding more in their tone than in their words. "It's dangerous out here alone," he said gently. "The desert can be unforgiving. Come with me. I can help you." Naomi and Liana exchanged a cautious glance. Trust did not come easily after everything they had endured, the loss of their husbands, the rejection of their village, the endless days of uncertainty. Yet, something in the cowboy's demeanor felt different. There was no harshness, no impatience, only a calm assurance that seemed rare in a world so often dominated by fear and survival. After a moment of hesitation, Naomi whispered, "Maybe we should." Liana nodded quietly, gripping her sister's hand as they approached the man, their steps tentative but hopeful. The cowboy introduced himself as Elias, a man who had traveled across the West for years, helping settlers, traders, and those lost in the wilderness. He offered them food and water first, a simple gesture but one that spoke volumes. Naomi and Liana accepted gratefully, drinking deeply and savoring the small meal he provided. The warmth of the food filled not only their stomachs, but also a space in their hearts that had been empty since the loss of their husbands. Elias watched them with quiet patience, understanding the depth of their exhaustion and grief. He did not rush them with questions or demands. Instead, he allowed them to regain their strength in their own time. After they had rested, Elias suggested that they continue traveling with him. "I know a safe path through the plains," he explained. "It will take time, but I can guide you to a place where you can rest properly, find work, and be safe." Naomi felt a mixture of relief and nervousness. Accepting help after everything they had endured was not easy, but she also knew that their journey alone had limits. Liana squeezed Naomi's hand, a silent encouragement to trust this man who had appeared almost like an answer to a prayer. As they rode together, Naomi marveled at the cowboy's skill. He navigated the land with ease, choosing paths that avoided treacherous cliffs and dangerous wildlife. He taught them how to move quietly, how to spot tracks of animals and people, and how to find safe places to rest. The sisters listened intently, absorbing every word. They realized that Elias was not only a guide, but also a teacher, showing them the ways of a land they had only begun to understand. Each lesson made them more confident, and Naomi felt a growing sense of hope that perhaps they could truly survive and even thrive in this world. Along the way, they encountered small challenges that tested their trust and resilience. A sudden thunderstorm swept across the plains, forcing them to find shelter quickly. Elias guided them to a narrow canyon, where overhanging rocks provided protection from the rain. Naomi and Liana huddled together under the small overhang, watching the storm rage around them. Lightning illuminated the rugged landscape, and thunder rolled like distant drums. For a moment, fear threatened to take over, but Elia's calm presence reminded them to breathe and endure. By the time the storm passed, the sisters felt a renewed sense of determination. If they could survive this, perhaps nothing could break them. During their journey, Elias also shared stories of the land and its people. He spoke of settlers building towns, of tribes navigating the challenges of a changing world, and of travelers who had found new beginnings in unexpected places. Naomi and Liana listened with fascination, learning that the world was vast and full of possibilities, despite its dangers. These stories sparked a curiosity and courage within them, making them feel that their lives were not just defined by loss and exile, but also by the choices they made and the paths they were willing to take. As days turned into weeks, Naomi and Liana began to trust Elias more deeply. They saw his fairness and kindness in small actions. He helped them gather water, taught them how to cook over an open fire, and encouraged them to keep their spirits high despite the challenges they faced. Naomi realized that trust could grow slowly, like a small plant nurtured carefully. And in the presence of this cowboy, they found a sense of safety they had not felt since leaving their village. One evening, as the sun dipped behind distant hills, Elias stopped near a small stream and suggested they rest for the night. Naomi and Liana settled on the grass, listening to the gentle babble of water. Elias tended the fire and offered them food. Naomi, feeling a sense of gratitude, finally spoke her thoughts aloud. We have been alone for so long. It is hard to believe there are still people who care." Elias nodded, his eyes reflecting understanding. "The world is full of challenges," he said gently, "but it is also full of those willing to help. You are not alone anymore." The sisters shared a quiet smile, a small but significant acknowledgement of the hope growing in their hearts. That night, as stars stretched across the sky and the desert settled into a calm hush, Naomi and Liana slept with a feeling they had not experienced in months. The sense that someone was watching over them, that the harshness of the world could be softened by kindness and guidance. They had been lost, wandering and frightened, but now a new chapter of their lives was beginning, a chapter where they could learn, grow, and perhaps even find joy again. The encounter with Elias marked a turning point in their journey. They were no longer two widowed sisters cast adrift by tradition and loss. They were travelers with guidance, with knowledge, and with a companion who believed in them. Naomi and Liana felt the stirrings of a dream they had thought impossible, that even in the Wild West, a world filled with dangers and hardships, they could survive, thrive, and rebuild their lives. And as the moon rose high above the plains, casting its silver light across the desert, the sisters felt a quiet determination. They were ready to face the next part of their journey, knowing that with each other, and with Elias by their side, they could meet the future with courage, hope, and strength. Naomi and Liana had been traveling with Elias for several days now, and the routine of the journey began to bring a sense of stability that they had not known since leaving their village. Each day was filled with lessons and challenges, and each challenge became an opportunity for growth. The sisters quickly realized that life in the Wild West was not just about walking across the plains. It was about understanding the land, reading its signs, and learning to survive within its sometimes harsh and unpredictable conditions. With Elias guiding them, they began to see the world in a new way, one that combined caution with curiosity, fear with courage. Their mornings began early, often before the sun rose. Elias taught them to wake with the first light, to use the quiet hours to move swiftly and conserve energy before the heat of the day became unbearable. Naomi learned how to identify safe plants for food, distinguishing the ones that could sustain them from those that could harm them. Liana, with her quick mind and nimble hands, learned how to set traps for small animals and how to make temporary shelters using branches, rocks, and pieces of cloth. Elias watched patiently, offering guidance without judgment, praising their efforts and correcting mistakes in gentle, encouraging ways. Slowly, the sisters began to feel capable and confident. As they traveled across the plains and through rocky canyons, Elias pointed out landmarks and taught the sisters how to navigate using the sun and stars. Naomi was fascinated by the lessons, discovering patterns in the natural world that she had never noticed before. She learned how to spot the faint tracks of deer, the subtle bends in a stream that indicated a hidden water source, and even the differences in bird calls that signaled approaching weather. Liana, equally attentive, grew skilled at finding safe paths through rough terrain, helping Naomi over rocks and guiding them past hidden dangers. Together, they became a team, their bond strengthening with every shared success and challenge overcome. One afternoon, while crossing a narrow canyon, the sisters spotted a herd of deer grazing near a small creek. Elias motioned for them to stay quiet, and they crouched low behind rocks, watching the animals. Naomi's heart pounded with excitement and fear. It was their first real opportunity to hunt, to test the skills Elias had taught them. With careful guidance, Liana prepared a simple trap, while Naomi kept watch. The plan worked, and they were able to secure a small deer for their next meal. The sisters' eyes lit up with pride, and for the first time in weeks, they felt a real sense of accomplishment. Elias smiled at them, recognizing the importance of these small victories, and reminded them, "Every skill you learn now is a step toward independence. You are stronger than you realize." Traveling with Elias was not without danger. One evening, they encountered a sudden storm that turned the plains into a sea of mud and flooded small streams. Lightning flashed across the darkened sky, and thunder shook the ground beneath their feet. Naomi and Liana clung to each other as the wind howled through the rocks, but Elias remained calm. He guided them to a sheltered spot beneath an overhang, where they huddled together for warmth. As the storm raged around them, Elias taught the sisters how to make temporary windbreaks and how to stay safe during violent weather. The sisters listened intently, learning not just from words, but from observation, and they realized that courage and preparedness could often mean the difference between life and death. During these long days on the trail, Elias shared stories of his own life in the Wild West. He told them of towns built on the edge of the frontier, of families who had traveled far from home to start anew, and of people who had learned to survive against incredible odds. Naomi and Liana listened with wide eyes, absorbing every word. These stories were more than entertainment. They were lessons, showing the sisters that life was not simply about enduring hardship, but about finding opportunities, taking risks, and building a future even when the past had been painful. With each tale, their sense of possibility grew, and they began to imagine what their own lives might become beyond the wilderness. As the days turned into weeks, the sisters became increasingly skilled in the arts of survival. Naomi learned how to make fire without matches, using flint and dry wood, and Liana mastered the art of gathering edible roots and berries without damaging the surrounding environment. Elias encouraged them to experiment and make mistakes, understanding that true learning came from experience. Each success, each small accomplishment, strengthened their confidence and deepened their belief that they could navigate the Wild West on their own. More importantly, the sisters began to believe in themselves again, shedding the despair that had weighed them down since leaving their village. One afternoon, while walking along a dry riverbed, they noticed signs of another group of travelers nearby, footprints and faint traces of firewood. Naomi felt a flicker of anxiety. Were these people friendly or dangerous? Elias reassured them, teaching them how to observe from a safe distance and gather information before deciding how to act. They learned to move silently, to watch and listen, and to make careful decisions. These skills gave the sisters a sense of control in a world that had once seemed overwhelmingly uncertain. Each lesson was a step toward independence, and with every challenge they met, Naomi and Liana grew stronger, more capable, and more confident. Despite the harshness of their journey, the sisters also discovered moments of beauty and joy. They watched sunsets that painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, felt the cool rush of water from hidden streams, and marveled at the constellations that glittered above them each night. Liana often laughed at Naomi's attempts to identify constellations, and Naomi smiled at Liana's jokes and stories. In these moments, the sisters realized that life in the Wild West was not only about struggle, it was about discovery, growth, and finding wonder in the simplest things. Elias encouraged these moments of joy, understanding that a strong mind and a hopeful heart were just as important as physical survival. By the end of their journey through the canyons and plains, Naomi and Liana had changed in ways they could not have imagined when they first left their village. They had learned the skills necessary to survive, yes, but they had also discovered courage, resilience, and the power of trust. The bond between them had grown stronger than ever, and their respect and gratitude for Elias deepened with each passing day. They were no longer simply widows cast out from their home. They were capable, resourceful, and determined young women, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they approached the edge of a small frontier settlement, Elias spoke with a sense of pride in his voice. "You've done well," he said. "You've learned the ways of the land, and you've grown stronger than you might have believed. Now it's time to see what life beyond the wilderness can offer you." Naomi and Liana exchanged a glance, their hearts filled with anticipation and nervous excitement. The journey through the Wild West had taught them that they could endure hardship, navigate danger, and rely on each other. And now, perhaps, they could find a place where they truly belonged. That evening, as they set up camp near the outskirts of the settlement, Naomi and Liana reflected on how far they had come. They thought of their village, of the grief and rejection that had set them on this path, and of the countless challenges they had overcome along the way. And yet, instead of sorrow, they felt a growing sense of hope. The wilderness had tested them, shaped them, and taught them lessons that could never have been learned elsewhere. With Elias by their side and each other to lean on, they felt ready to begin a new chapter, one filled not with fear or loss, but with possibility, growth, and the promise of a future they could shape with their own hands. Naomi and Liana could see the outlines of the settlement. As they crested the final hill, small wooden houses dotted the landscape, smoke curling from chimneys, and the sound of life, horses, chatter, and distant hammering, reached them across the plains. It was unlike anything they had experienced since leaving their village. For weeks, the sisters had relied on the desert, the plains, and Elias to survive, but now a new world awaited them, a place where they could belong, where people were building lives, not just enduring the wilderness. Naomi felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was unfamiliar territory, and yet it offered something she had not felt for a long time: hope. Elias led them down the dusty road into the heart of the settlement. "We'll find a place for you to stay, food for your stomach, and work that suits your skills," he said. Naomi and Liana followed closely, their eyes wide, taking in the bustling activity around them. Children played near wooden fences, merchants called out from stalls, and horses trotted along the main street. The air smelled of baked bread, fresh hay, and the earthy scent of livestock. For the sisters, this was a world of possibilities, a sharp contrast to the endless, empty plains they had navigated. Their first stop was a small inn on the edge of the settlement. The owner, a kind-faced woman named Martha, welcomed them warmly. She offered them a room to rest, clean water to wash their dust-streaked faces, and a hearty meal that made their stomachs ache with relief. Naomi and Liana had grown used to simple, foraged food, but this meal, bread, fresh vegetables, and roasted meat, felt like a luxury, a small taste of a life they could build if they were patient and diligent. Martha watched them with curiosity and kindness, noticing their quiet strength and the respectful way they carried themselves despite everything they had endured. After their meal, Elias introduced them to members of the settlement. Farmers, tradespeople, and other travelers offered smiles, greetings, and friendly words. Naomi and Liana felt a sense of belonging they had not known since being expelled from their village. They realized that the world beyond the wilderness was not as frightening as they had feared. People could be kind, and a community could offer support and opportunities. Slowly, they began to understand that life could be rebuilt, brick by brick, moment by moment, if one was willing to try. Elias helped them find work suited to their abilities. Naomi, who had developed remarkable skills in tracking, foraging, and preparing food during their journey, found employment assisting Martha in the inn's kitchen. She learned to bake bread, cook meals for travelers, and manage supplies. Liana, who had shown exceptional resourcefulness and courage, began helping local farmers with planting, gathering, and caring for animals. At first, the sisters were nervous, worried that they would make mistakes or be judged, but the people of the settlement were patient and encouraging. With every task they completed, Naomi and Liana's confidence grew. They were no longer simply survivors, they were contributors, valued for their work and abilities. Life in the settlement was not without challenges. There were days when supplies ran low, when storms swept across the plains, and when fear of the unknown crept into the sisters' hearts. Yet, they faced each difficulty with the skills and resilience they had learned on their journey. Naomi and Liana had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. They relied on each other and drew strength from their shared experiences. The hardships of the Wild West, which had once seemed unbearable, now became opportunities to demonstrate strength, ingenuity, and perseverance. As the weeks passed, Naomi and Liana began to form friendships within the settlement. Children were drawn to Liana's playful spirit, and neighbors often sought Naomi's advice on food preparation and resource management. The sisters found themselves laughing again, sharing stories of their journey and learning about the lives of those around them. They discovered that community was not just about survival, it was about connection, shared experiences, and mutual support. For the first time since leaving their village, Naomi and Liana felt a sense of belonging that went beyond necessity. They were part of something larger than themselves, and it brought a joy that had been absent from their lives for far too long. Elias remained a constant presence in their lives, though he no longer needed to guide them every step of the way. He continued to offer advice, teach lessons about the land, and share his knowledge of the world beyond the settlement. Naomi and Liana were grateful for his guidance, recognizing that his help had been the bridge between despair and hope. They no longer saw themselves as helpless. They were strong, capable, and ready to take control of their own destinies. Elias' quiet support reminded them that kindness and trust could exist even in a harsh world, and that relationships built on respect and care were among the most valuable treasures of life. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with vibrant colors, Naomi and Liana stood together on a small hill overlooking the settlement. The streets below bustled with activity, the lights of homes and shops flickering in the fading light. They reflected on their journey, the grief and loss that had set them on the path, the hardships of the desert, the lessons learned under Elias' guidance, and the skills and courage they had gained along the way. Naomi turned to Liana, her eyes shining. "We've come so far," she said softly. Liana nodded, squeezing her sister's hand. "And we've learned so much. We're not the same people we were when we left our village." The sisters understood that the past would always be a part of them, but it no longer defined them. Their husbands' memories lived in their hearts, but they were no longer held back by sorrow or rejection. They had discovered independence, resilience, and the power of hope. The settlement offered them a chance to build a life based on their own choices, rather than the restrictions of tradition or circumstance. Naomi and Liana felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had endured, knowing that each struggle had prepared them for this moment of possibility. In the months that followed, Naomi and Liana continued to grow in their new lives. They became skilled workers in their respective roles, respected and admired by their peers. They found moments of joy in simple pleasures, sharing a meal with neighbors, laughing with children, watching the sun rise over the plains. The Wild West, which had once seemed a place of fear and danger, became a landscape of opportunity and discovery. Naomi and Liana realized that survival was only the first step. Living fully and embracing life's possibilities was the next. Elias, seeing the sisters flourish, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had guided them through the wilderness, teaching not only survival skills but also the lessons of trust, courage, and hope. Now he watched them build their own lives, independent and strong, ready to face whatever the future might hold. Naomi and Liana were no longer just travelers or widows. They were women who had reclaimed their lives, shaped by hardship but not defined by it, capable of facing the world with confidence and resilience. As the story of Naomi and Liana's journey came full circle, the sisters stood together once more under the stars, this time not in fear or uncertainty, but in quiet triumph. The vast, unpredictable world of the Wild West had tested them, challenged them, and transformed them. And through it all, they had discovered that even in the face of loss and hardship, it was possible to find hope, to build a life, and to create a place where they truly belonged. With each other and with the lessons they had learned, Naomi and Liana knew that their future was not determined by the past, but by the courage, strength, and determination they carried within themselves. The sisters had journeyed from grief and rejection to survival, skill, and hope. They had learned that life was unpredictable, often harsh, but also full of beauty, friendship, and opportunity. Their bond as sisters, their trust in Elias, and their willingness to embrace the unknown had carried them through every trial. And now, in the safety and community of the settlement, Naomi and Liana looked forward to a future they could shape with their own hands, a future full of promise, resilience, and the quiet joy of a life reclaimed.